talking now with Alison Croggan, an award-winning novelist. But Alison, you're also a poet. You write for theatre, including librettos, and you're an arts critic, currently the arts editor at the Saturday paper. Your recently released memoir, Monsters, is a vast story and very personal. It's the breakdown of your relationship with your sister. It's about colonialism and the patriarchy, about poverty, violence, and the arts. It's about how each person's unique background, their family, their upbringing, and their ancestry is tied to how they exist in the world. And I wondered if you could just talk about how you embarked upon this book and how you hold that vastness, how you held that vastness as you wrote.
It was obviously a book. It was one of those books that was like a lot of my poetry, I suppose. I had to write it. Some books I write more for pleasure and, for readers, as it were. That my fantasy is like that. One always writes for a reader, but with fantasy, when I first started writing fantasy, I've written some epic fantasy books and other kinds. It was like I really am writing this for the readers, and it's the sort of book I enjoy reading and want to write for myself in that way. But poetry and this book, this kind of prose, which is kind of memoir / essay / I don't know what, that kind of book, came out of a certain kind of emotional necessity. It was an exploration for me, an essay in the sense of the word that it's an essay into something, an exploration towards something that I don't necessarily know and that is difficult and painful to explore. So it was a hard book to write and took, I suppose, it took quite a while to actually write, but also took longer to kind of come towards. So it's an old book in that way.
It not in a bad way, but it was a difficult book to read as well. Like it felt, I definitely interrogated my own family and my own way in the world as I read. But I felt very grateful to you for writing this book. Yeah. And you mentioned your fantasy books. Obviously, your very successful and amazing Pellinor series has been around for a little while now. But I was so pleased to. But yet, it still sells. But your more recent Threads of Magic, I had the pleasure of selling at the Sun Bookshop when it came out, and that story is about Pip, the pickpocket. In that fantasy city of Claral, who steals a little silver sort of like chalice or box with a heart in it, and unwittingly sets off sort of an ancient war. So your fantasy is so dark and twisty. I realize we've moved on quite fast from Monsters, but we can come back to it. But yeah, and it's been published here and in the US. And so you say you think about your reader a little bit, like you're always considering the reader. How do you approach like writing fantasy for children?
I love writing for children. This is the first middle grade book I wrote. And just before lockdown last year, Monsters was my second book, pandemic book. It's like, it's not ideal. All us poor authors putting out books during pandemics. But just before we shut down in March last year, I managed to squeeze in a schools tour for Threads of Magic. So I was going to schools around Sydney and Melbourne and talking to kids. And before I started it, I was thinking, gosh, I haven't talked to this age group before, and I hope it'll be okay. And I was a little bit nervous, and they're so delightful. This is like 8 to 12. I just had such a ball talking to these kids. And it's delightful. I suppose when I'm writing for that age group, I've just finished the first draft of another middle grade. I'm thinking about the books that I loved when I was that age, the same when I was writing the books of Pellinor. It was the books I adored when I was a teenager and adult, actually. Eleanor is kind of published as a YA, but also as an adult book in different countries, which is kind of, you know. And actually, the weird thing about Threads of Magic was I was like, this time I'm going to write a definite YA, and nobody will say, well, what is it? This is definitely a YA. And they came back saying, oh, this is great middle grade fantasy. So it was very peculiar.
Sometimes I think these labels are just
they're
for
very
the bookshelf.
arbitrary. And when I was a kid, and there was the school library had, junior, middle grade, senior. I resented all of those, and I used to, because I read everything I could get my hands on when I was a kid, and I found them really patronising. And I suppose in a way I still do. I mean, I understand the guidance. And I read, I'm sorry, there's a rubbish truck going on outside.
Isn't it life?
I understand the need for guidance, perhaps for parents who feel that their children shouldn't be reading stuff that's too old for them. But at the same time, as a kid, I just wanted to read what I wanted to read.
And I feel like you're a writer who writes what you want to write. Is that how you see yourself with all these?
Yeah. Well, I can't write what I don't want to write.
And so each book or each theatre piece just comes out of how you're feeling in that moment. Is that how you approach your writer life?
Gosh, that's interesting. They pop up. There's usually a long gestation period with anything I write. So the idea, the seed of it, will be there for a few years before I start writing it. And I don't know quite what. Sometimes it's tied to things like contracts, or I've got some kind of commitment and a deadline. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just I really need to write this now for some reason. But that's really difficult to say what those specific reasons are. Sometimes it's all a bit vague in a way.
Yeah.
I think a lot of writing is like that. There's a lot of inchoate kind of stuff going on at the back of your mind, and you just kind of have to trust it.
I think so. And
yeah.
But yeah, my feeling is that I really envy the breadth of your work, and I think it's really special. And so you're writing from your heart, or from a dedication to a contract, and are you thinking of your audience, like as you as the writer at centre, or and thinking about an audience and how they might interact with you, or could you just exist in multitudes?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose when you're actually working on something, you're just writing it. I mean, it's a peculiar space to be in, really. Sometimes when I'm deep in a novel and I get up at the end of the day and I go, what a weird way to spend my life. Like, what am I doing? I'm sort of imagining stuff. So you start on something. It doesn't matter whether it's a poem or a libretto or what it is, nonfiction. It has its own logic once you start. I think Flaubert, I remember reading, saying that you could hear the footfalls for pages ahead of the words. Once it has a rhythm, it has a feeling and a shape. And actually, when I'm doing all my before book brooding, which I do a lot of brooding, I'm not thinking about what happens in the book. I'm thinking about what it feels like and what the shape is. And that's a very vague mental thing. But it ends up being, is it sort of questions like, is it first person, because that's a certain kind of thing, or is it third person, or is it long, or is it short, or is it lyric, or is it... And they're not quite conscious decisions, but you kind of know when you start the first page. I usually have a go and I write like 10, 15 pages, and then it'll go in a drawer or in a file on my computer and stay there for a year or so, or longer sometimes. And then I'll drag it out, and then I'll start doing kind of calculations like, is it long, is it short? But you kind of know from the beginning after a while that it'll be, 160 pages or 300, and that kind of shape determines a lot. about then how the narrative unfolds. But I'm the kind of writer, I know people who start from, they have lots of notes and they have lots of plans and things like that. I actually envy people like that. I can't do that. I can see a little way ahead, but not, I have to write it all the way through and from beginning to end usually.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like an organic thing that grows with its own logic.
Yeah, and Monsters certainly, so it is its whole, but reading through it is like following almost a process of writing. And when you're coming to like finalizing a manuscript for Monsters,
Yeah.
particularly as your recent book, how does that, how do you know when it's done, and how do you finish something?
Well, I do write to the end. And so I suppose what I'm doing is I'm following emotional intuition as I go. I mean, you bring all your skills and your intelligence and what you know about writing to the task at hand. And that's actually what I think about when I'm writing. But I have to trust the emotional direction it's going in. Monsters was obviously a very complicated emotional direction. And part of when I was writing it, I have to say, the thought that was constantly with me when I was writing it was that I want to get this right this time. I want it to be as truthful as possible, so I never have to write this damn book again. It was really a very strong feeling, and I sincerely hope I never have to have that feeling again. But it's what that meant was a whole lot of self-reflexive stuff going on in the writing. And I found myself in the writing, and I think it's in the book, just avoiding stuff that I wanted to look at. I was amazed when I started how evasive I could be. But evasiveness, as it were, was also divagations into things that were pertaining to the book, and basically the book is about how do we end up with these shapes of thinking that cause so much damage as children of colonists, as children of settlers, and that, I mean, in the end, I really, we know also about how patriarchy shapes us, both men, women, and others. How we're shaped by the larger forces, and so I was really, I suppose I've been a little bit obsessed with that all my life, because my English migrant in Australia I came here when I was 6, and so from a very, family of colonists, there's absolutely no kind of denying familial culpability there. So what does that mean? And for, I suppose another thing I was interested in was how things don't change, how the same questions get asked in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Here we are again, about women, about people of colour, about Black people, about Indigenous people, where there's still the same questions. In some ways we go backwards. Like what is that resistance that means change is so impossible? And it's a deep psychological thing. And I suppose that's what I really wanted to have a look at, is what is those deep, intimate resistances to us looking at who we are, and to the extent that we can, taking responsibility for it, because it's so bad for us as people. It's really terrible what these forces do to us psychically and emotionally. We're stunted by them. And, our relationships are not what they ought to be because of these forces that most of the time we're not really that aware of, and we resist looking at. So that was my kind of thesis, I suppose, at the beginning. And in order to look at that, I had to examine myself quite a lot, and as well as, just talking about some fairly painful personal stuff. Though I tried to be, it's it's difficult to do that. And it's difficult to do that without wounding other people, even if you try not to.
as well as it being so personal and you looking to your own life and your own experiences, I get the sense that our inputs also, like you say, like world around us and our history, that takes part in that fracture. But do you think that the way we take in culture can help, can help to sort of maybe make some connections and make some healing? And I'm just very conscious of your work as a critic, and a lot of the things you've obviously read and seen are in this book. Do you think there are answers there and a path forward?
Well, I don't subscribe to the idea that literature or any kind of art makes you a better person. There seems to be a really common kind of thing, and that I always feel, well, Adorno did all of that work because he was asking exactly the same question: how is it possible that the Nazis were German people of enormous culture who loved, all this amazing culture, and there they were, doing mass murder? No, culture doesn't necessarily make you a better person, but it is a way to expand your consciousness. It is a way to learn and study, and also, it is a place of delight as well, which I think is something that people really sometimes don't. Well, it's almost like the pleasure and delight of art and culture is something that people feel ashamed of sometimes. And talk about guilty pleasures and things. I think it's fundamental. So yeah, it doesn't make us better people to be well read or to understand culture. There's so many different kinds of culture, but it is a way that we communicate as human beings, and at its best, in our interactions with it, we do learn. We can understand things that we didn't understand before, if that makes any sense.
That absolutely does, yeah. And
I totally believe in culture and art, and at the same time, I have these huge skepticisms about what it's made into, and both those things exist at the same time.
And as you write, when you're being Alison the writer, are you thinking about critics on the other side?
No. One really good side effect about being a critic is that I don't. Like if I get bad reviews, I'm like everybody else. It's like, oh. And you always hope to please people, and you're never going to please everybody. That's just part of putting stuff out in public. But it does mean that, the critical part of me was something I think that's always been there. I've always, since I was a kid, I liked thinking about the stuff I encountered, but I was also a really hugely intuitive writer, and putting the critical stuff with the intuitive stuff was actually a really long journey for me. It took me years and years of work, and I was lucky enough to have a couple of really excellent mentors who helped me, but to become more conscious of the intuitive thing. But you still need that intuitive sense strongly. You mustn't let that go, because otherwise what are you working with, in a way? You just need to learn how to work with it and bring your critical mind to it. So I was first of all critical in my own work as an artist, and I suppose I just really enjoy that thing of like what I loved about going to the theatre is going to the theatre and then having huge discussions and disagreements afterwards about what it was that you saw, and it is enormously pleasurable to me. So the criticism kind of, as accidentally in a way, grew out of that. When in my late 20s, when I started reviewing professionally, and it was very accidental. And so now I don't actually worry too much about critique. It's like, by the time a book has come to publication, I've read it so many times, and I know what I think of it,
Yeah.
and I'm probably harsher than most people on my own work. But it's also important to know what is good about it.
Yeah, and why you've written it.
Yeah, it's good to. I think if you work really hard on something and you know that you've done as much as you can and you've been as rigorous as you can, there's always more to do. This thing with work, you look at it and you go, well, a few years later, I could have done that better. But that's also fine. You finish where you do the best you can at the time, and I think that's the most you can ask from yourself.
And in terms of your work as an arts critic, you're obviously looking at work that is very, very personal and to other people. And so I'm interested in how you approach writing about other people's work.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think, and obviously theatre critics are obsessed, and theatre is obsessed with talking about criticism. It's much more than most other art forms. So we like to discuss it, and other people like to discuss it with us. I think when you're approaching someone else's work, it's really important to approach it with respect. That even the books that you think are terrible, this is just absolutely not working, that's a lot of work. So respect. And the really important thing for a critic, I think, is to pay attention. And I know as a writer, even if someone's negatively critical about something, if they paid attention to what I've done and considered it and perceived it, that is not a problem for me. And very often, I discovered this when I first started a blog in early 2000s, at a time when there wasn't, it was when blogs was first new, and people didn't know what they were. But I'd go to some independent production and write a fairly stern review of something or other, and I'd get emails from people saying thank you for attending to what we did. And I was like, wow, things are really bad. but also touched, because what you want is someone, I'd write long reviews about it. And so what matters is paying attention, and paying serious attention to what that work is as far as you can, and then bringing everything that you have to discussing it. And that's a generous attention, I think. And even the only times when I get really cross, I suppose, is when I feel something is fraudulent, is pretending to be something for some self-interested reason that it actually is not, which can be, often the case in, well-funded performance. But I think a generous attention is the kind of really essential, and curiosity. I'm sometimes surprised at how incurious critics can be.
And over the past year or so, do you think that the landscape has changed, both for writers and in terms of your own work as a critic?
Well, given I'm a performance critic, there's been almost nothing to review. It's been actually, in a way, interesting. First of all, I was like, yay, I don't have to go out. And then, it's good to have a break every now and then from doing it so you don't get stale. But I miss it. And it's been terrible watching what's been happening to culture in Australia over the past 10 years, but over the past 18 months, it's devastating. And we're not going to come out of this well.
So what I was going to ask is, do you see a way forward, and what can we do perhaps as we move on to help this grow again?
Well, I think people who love culture, who love books haven't suffered quite as much, but it's still.
I think of the theatre, I was lucky to get into one of the Rising Festival shows, but
yes, I saw one. That was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
really heartbreaking. It's yeah, support your artists. You know, if you love what they do, support them. And we're lucky to live in Victoria, where there is some quite solid state government support. But even so, I think this is showing us that we have to think differently about what culture is. And I don't know what the way forward is. I don't know what shape we're going to be in when the pandemic stops being such an emergency. I actually have no idea. But we're going to stand up at the end and go, well, what's left?
And your own writing, or even your reading, how have you gone over the last 18 months? You wrote a book.
I wrote a book. It's been interesting, hasn't it? It's like I haven't been able to read that much lately.
I've heard that from a lot of people.
Yeah, I am reading, and I love it when I do sit down and read, but I have to really get there. And so I'm not reading as much. I'm always a fairly what's the word? I read all over the place. I read fiction, non-fiction, poetry, whatever. I'm probably reading more fiction than normal now. And probably doing more comfort reading.
What do you call comfort reading?
I was always rereading something. An old fave. Yeah. I tend to go back to children's books, the ones I adored when I was a kid. So yeah, that kind of nostalgia reading, I guess. They're also great books, though.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Alison. I've really appreciated it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And I will say that this episode is being supported by the Sun Bookshop, which is an independent bookshop in Yarraville in Melbourne's West. Former staff member here myself, but wonderful shop. And while they're closed at the moment, you can follow the link in the description to buy Alison's books from the Sun and the Younger Sun, and have a little virtual visit at the store.
It's a great shop. My local.
This looks like a retail outlet. But wait, it's so much more. This is a portal to a world of infinite possibilities. Hello!
Welcome to the Sun Bookshop, where we cater to your every literary need. Located in the heart of Yarraville, right next to the beautiful Art Deco Sun Theatre, we pride ourselves in supporting local Australian authors. We may look small here, but our hearts are huge. So why don't you come on down and let us show you.
Jamil, what are you reading at the moment?
Very good question. I am in fact reading Piranesi by Susanna Clarke.
Ooh.
For anyone who's a fan of a good small fantasy, but also love a good mystery and something in between those two, Piranesi is the book for you. It may surprise you with what it's got.
Amazing. Sun Bookshop!
You're being a nuisance. As usual, not on my keyboard. Okay.